What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you 5 of my favorite fantasy races, and to kick things off, a little bit of information. For starters, I prefer to play things that are very fantastic in their nature, because, I'm already a human being, or so I would have you believe. So the idea of just playing a regular guy in a video game or a tabletop session just kind of doesn't really speak to my imagination, frankly. However, in preferring races that are, again, a bit more fantastic in their nature. As a result, they tend not to actually make it into a lot of the video games, so for some of these, I'm definitely going to just be throwing a picture up on the screen rather than actually being able to show you anything outside of like 1 or 2 cases. And secondly, some of the origins or the lore for each of these races kind of changes depending on the game you're playing or the setting you're playing them in. As such, just know that there's a little bit of variance in that kind of thing with this stuff. And with no further ado, let's jump right into it. Now, we're going to start off with a bit of a 2-for-1, as in my opinion, they are basically 2 sides of the same coin. And that is Asamar and Tiflings. Now, Asamar are a people with a celestial heritage. They have a celestial ancestor. And that has manifested in this person. This could be a direct parent or someone way back in their bloodline, which is more often the case. But as a result, they have a celestial bearing, and they usually have glowing features of some kind. And then there's the opposite form of this, the Tieflings. These are, of course, people with a devilish heritage, and as such are usually the result of an ancestor making some deal with the devil, as it were, that resulted in them being what they are. Now, these 2 races in particular I enjoy because you can subvert people's expectations of what they are. Because while they are kind of aligned with good and aligned with evil in a way, you can play them however you want, because they are not, in fact, a celestial being or a devilish being really outside of their appearance. And while they definitely tend to stray towards those things, a lot of the fun with playing these characters is that morality of them choosing who they want to be, which I've always enjoyed. Plus, they look cool, so come on. Now, number 4 on the list, we actually have the Yantee Purebloods. So the Yantee are a race of sort of varying degrees of snake-like humanoids, with the top tiers of their society being incredibly snake-like, to the point that they're basically just snakes with arms. And then at the very bottom rung of the Yantee pyramid, if you will, is the Yantee Purebloods. Now, for the most part, you could pass these people off as human beings. And in fact, they often do. They tend to infiltrate societies for the Yantee as spies and just try to blend in and gather information. However, the Purebloods are treated very poorly by the rest of their race, as they, of course, venerate snakes, and the Purebloods look the least like snakes. So they are the bottom caste of the society, and as such, they are a bit prone to kind of just going off and doing their own thing in some cases, which is where you get the opportunities to roleplay as them. Now, this is a race that definitely strays towards evil, very, very much so. The chances of one of these things being a good person is basically 0, but they are basically a snake-human hybrid of some sort. They get a lot of cool abilities in general. They tend to have an immunity to poison, or at least an affinity for it. In D&D in particular, they tend to get some of the poison-based spells just right off the bat as abilities, rather than having to cast them from like a spell slot, etc. But I really enjoy the Purebloods in particular because you don't really see this particular race basically anywhere. And as such, it kind of strikes me as a fairly unique concept, even if they are, pretty evil stock standard. Now, third on our list, probably one of the more unimaginative ones, to be honest, but it is the Dragonborn. Now, the history behind these guys really kind of changes depending on the campaign setting you're using. But in general, these are sort of draconic humanoids. They don't tend to have tails or wings, and they are typically made from modified dragon eggs for some nefarious purpose. Again, the lore behind these guys changes quite a bit, but overall, they're very cool. They're inherently draconic in nature. They get a breath weapon even, so, hard not to like them. And then we have, in our second spot, a more interesting case, and that is either the Kinku or the Tengu. So this is a race of bird folk, and you'll hear them called 2 different things, and this is largely because Kinku is a D&D word. As such, anywhere else in the tabletop sphere, etc., you're going to hear it called Tengu, more than likely. Or Aarakocra, or kind of like a cousin, but in the case of the Kinku or the Tengu, rather than being eagle-like, they're very crow-like. Sometimes you'll see these guys with wings, sometimes you won't, but they very much tend to be a sort of outsider thief type. My personal favorite background for them is for the Kinku in particular. There's supposed to be like some ancient curse that robbed the race of their wings, which isn't the most unique thing in the world. You actually see that trope, if you will, across a few different types of fantasy. But nonetheless, I like the idea of them, and visually I think they're pretty striking as well. And then, for our last spot, most of this list hasn't really been in any particular order. They're just races that I like. This particular spot here in our number 1 place is the race that I genuinely actually do like more than just about any other fantasy race, and that is none other than the Janasi. Janasi are the offspring of genies and mortals, or humanoids. Depending on the type of genie heritage they have, they come in 4 types, each associated with an element, fire, earth, water, air. They get some different abilities depending on which one they are. So for sub-races, they essentially pick an element and then they get those extra abilities. For instance, the water Janasi can, of course, breathe underwater, and then the air Janasi can just hold their breath permanently so long as they're conscious. Stuff like that. And then, of course, there's different ability score type stuff that usually goes along with each particular type. But overall, I like the Janasi simply because they are just a really cool concept. Now, from a role-playing perspective, in a lot of ways, they are very similar to just being a human. They just get some extra effects depending on the type of genie ancestry that they have. But I usually find that it's just enough to differentiate them in terms of role-playing to be a really cool concept that can be fun to build a background for. But overall, I just think they're a really cool race, and they are absolutely one of my favorites. But there you go, guys. Just a short list of some of my absolute favorite fantasy races. I hope you enjoyed it. By all means, let me know down below what some of your favorite races are. There are a ton of just really cool, fun races for people to play in the fantasy setting. And I personally tend to get a little bored with just like the human, dwarf, elf stereotypes, and I like to take a look at some of the broader stuff. So with that in mind, I would love to hear what you guys enjoy in terms of fantasy races. But again, hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, thank you so much for watching. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.